just waiting for you. Do,
So where do you live exactly? I know you're in the Bay Area. Is that correct?
Yeah, near the Bay Area, but actually more inland now. I live in Sacramento, which is probably about a couple hours from San Francisco. Inland, more northeast.
So what's the striper fishing like over there by you?
So basically, I have like three major rivers by me. I have the American, the Feather, and the Sacramento River, and basically, it's like it's year round striper fishing for the most part.
That's cool. Let's talk about it a little bit because I don't know too much about West Coast striped bass fishing. I know that it exists, and I've heard people say that they think the next record is going to come out of the West Coast. So for people like me that don't really know much about it and are, only familiar with East Coast striped bass fishing, what are some things that would stand out?
Um, it's a total different type of. I mean, I'm fishing on the East Coast as well myself on a regular basis. It's a different. I think how they feed and how they move is a lot different compared to like the East Coast. Reason being is the temperatures out here. We don't get freezing temperatures. So how they feed and how they move is not forced by temperature. They mainly stay in areas just basically as long as they could feed. They don't really want to move much. They'll move if there's no food, but if there's a regular steady source of food for them, they can stay in any body of water for like a whole year. So you could catch stripers in our freshwater river system year round. You could catch them in the brackish delta area year round. You could catch them in the saltwater bay, back bay area year round. You could catch them in the surf year round. Now you're going to have times that you, certain areas are a little bit more stronger, a little more presence of stripers certain times of the year. But it is not like uncommon to catch a striper in any of those body water at any time during the year because of the water temps. The on average, our water temps are from like in the summer it could get as warm as like 60 to like in the winter it could get cold water temps to about 40, 45 at the coldest. So yeah, I mean, as far as like catching a world record out here, I doubt it
Yeah.
because our population is not as big as it once was. At one time we had close to maybe our biomass was close to about 3 mil. Now it sits around 250 to 300,000.
Wow. What contributed to that?
Um, so in the 80s, we create out here in Northern California, they created a aqueduct system that basically it's like a canal system that runs down, it's right down almost the middle of California, all the way down to Southern California. So we're talking a canal system that transfers fresh water and it diverts that water into that canal system and it takes it to Southern California, which is about 600 miles of travel. So, the best way I've described it before, so it'd be like taking water out of the Hudson River before it hits the salt water, right? And creating a canal system that goes all the way down to Florida. So when you open the gates out of that river system and you transfer that water, you're taking water, but you're also taking fish with it. So that is why, like a lot of these reservoirs in Southern California and then along the way have striped bass in them. It's because they were pulled out of our Delta Sacramento freshwater system, and they're transferred over to there. So once they're in that system, they're stuck. They're not going to be able to swim against that current and get back out. So they're basically there's no chance of them ever being part of our reproduction system for Northern California. It's impossible. It just won't happen. And they could try to spawn while they're in the system, going to Southern California and other lakes and river reservoirs and stuff, but it won't be successful because if you know anything about how they spawn, once they spawn, that egg needs to float for 24 hours without hitting any ground. And there's just no part of those water systems that offer something like that. The only river system that we have that could properly sustain that is this upper Sacramento River. That's where they spawn out here. So, yeah. So, we've had some big striped bass caught in here. I think our record is like 68 pounds. I do know of a 72-pound that was caught many years ago, but the gentleman had no interest on claiming it. Didn't want any of that. I do know that if I recall, someone told me he did have it. Somebody made a mount of it, but that was about it. It was kept very low key. It was really basically word of mouth, kind of how it spread. But he didn't want no publicity to it or any of that. Um, you know, it, as far as a world record happening down here, I don't think so. The only reason is because we lose those fish. So you could have a 40 to 50-pound fish in our water system. Let's say it's in the Sacramento or in the Delta or in the Bay or whatnot. But if it at any time while it's traveling gets sucked into that aqueduct system, it's lost. It's in. So I just and in that water system, when they get to it, the food source is not the same.
Yeah.
You typically find them really, really skinny in those water systems once they get pushed into that canal system. The food source is not sustainable. It there is some, but not to where you never see them like really fat. You know what I mean? Out of those water systems. So.
That's interesting. So you might have said this, I might have missed it, but were the stripers indigenous? Were they native to the Sacramento Bay area, or were they were planted there in the 80s, right? That's what you said?
No. So in the 1880s, once we developed the railroad system that came from the East Coast across the country, they actually brought numerous of species out here to our California Delta. They brought American shad, they brought largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, striped bass, and whatnot. They brought many different species because the native species that we had here, it didn't seem. I think they felt that it could be a lot better than for what we had in the bodies of water. I think they felt that having more species was probably a good idea. So striped bass were brought over in 1880, and I think it was like 130 of them. They didn't have much success with that, so they made another run. I think they brought like close to 300, and they all came from New Jersey. They out of the Navesink River. So they probably put them in fresh water in crates, and they were able to keep them alive somewhere in fresh water, and they planted another 300, I believe, like a few years later. And that population, like I said, at one time grew close to 2 million. So at one time in the 20s to 30s, we had actually enough population we had a commercial fishery for striped bass in Northern California, but they shut that down in the late 30s because they started wiping them out, and they realized if they continued a commercial fishery that they weren't going to be able to sustain them. So they took away the commercial fishery. So yeah, another thing that kind of hurts our population as far as size go, and even population. I think the population mainly is because of the transfer of the water system. I think we lose a lot of population. It could be small fish or big fish. As soon as those gates are open, we lose whatever's in the area. Another thing that hurts us also is our regulations. An angler out here is allowed to keep a 18-inch or bigger striped bass, and you're allowed to keep two per possession. So
That's rough.
yeah, so typically, you know, y- like any given day, you could go out and catch a striped bass between like 18 inches to like 25 inches. That's like a norm. Like you could do that all year long. Once you start getting into a, I would say a 35-inch, 40-inch striped bass, it gets a lot harder. There's guys that can find them. Um, but being consistent on that, it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of hard
Yeah.
work, and a lot of you have to know where to be, when to be, um, and it takes just a lot of fucking like a lot of time on the water because a lot of it's also a lot of luck because the populations are not as big. So you're going to be putting in a lot of hours for to get any results that you want.
Yeah.
Now there is you do have areas that you could catch 40 to 50 pound fish. But like I said, that's gonna even if you think catching a 40-inch fish is gonna be hard, just imagine how much harder it is to catch a lot more larger fish. It's gonna be, it takes a lot of. That's not very common. There's only a handful of anglers out here that are pretty consistent with that. Even then, they'll any of those angles will tell you they probably put in a good, 250 to 200 days out of the year trying to fucking make that happen. And
Yeah.
you may catch one out of the year, you may catch none if you're shooting for like a 45 to 50 pound fish. You know what I mean? So it's not like you're gonna, run into like, oh, fucking, I got into them, this year and I got like 20 of them on that size. I know guys in the East Coast that I keep a regular contact with. They do that every year. They're really good anglers. They put in the hard work, but it, out here, you'll be lucky if you'll be happy if with one, if that happened for you.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, so it's a lot harder. The approach is a lot different. As far as techniques, it's a lot different. So in certain situations, some techniques that you could use on the East Coast apply, and some techniques do not apply at all. So
What are some
it's
crossover techniques that work on both coasts that you've noticed?
it depends on where. If I'm fishing in the surf or I'm fishing in the bay, like in the surf, using metal lips is fucking it's really effective. You just got to know how to work them. It's not your typical just a cast and retrieve type of lure out here. A lot of guys. We use metal lips out here as a top water plug, almost like a waking plug. Um, you know, we don't try to get them to deep because to swim deep because our undertow here on the Pacific coast is a lot different. We don't our because the Pacific Ocean, the way the Earth moves, that's why the surfing is a lot better on the Pacific coast because the way the Earth moves, the swell is a lot different. That's why we have you have big surfing tournaments out here in California because it's just a lot different versus like when you're on the East Coast, because the Earth is rotating almost with it to the east. The water that's coming towards the land it's a lot more calmer. You know what I mean? That's why you have a lot of flat land. You have there's some areas that have steep drop offs and stuff like that, but you'll never have like big surf like we do out in on the West Coast. So your approach is a lot different. Your structures are different. But yeah, um, so I usually try to apply a little bit of what I use on the West Coast to the East Coast and vice versa. But it's all situational and depending on how and where what approach you're doing. Having a good mixture or a hybrid of both, it works effectively. But yeah, it's completely different. I think out here on the West Coast, a lot of guys are typically just like to just make a cast, retrieve, and make a cast and retrieve. As far as like working a plug, that's kind of there's very few guys that actually do something like that. You know what I mean? So Um, so yeah, it's different. The culture is different. You go out to the East Coast, and there's probably over 100 fishing clubs for striped bass. On the West Coast, there's I think one, and it's not even popular. The culture is just way different. You know what I mean?
Down to the bait too, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
don't do any chunking on the West Coast, right? It's mostly
No,
swim
it's
baits
not a
and
popular.
plugs.
No, it's mainly a lot of just lure throwing. Throwing swim baits or they're all your different lures, but very, very. There's not much like. I mean, there's guys that'll fish bait for them, but that's kind of like usually like your beginner stage out here. It's like, oh, I'm just whatever I could catch. If I catch a catfish or I catch a striper or whatever, I just
Yeah,
want to catch a
yeah.
fish. You know what I mean? And they may get lucky and get, a decent fish, whatnot, but it's not they're not targeting specifically, you know what I mean? So they're just hoping to get something for the most part.
Yeah.
So, um,
Do you guys deal with a lot of poachers? Is that a
oh
problem
yeah,
out
yeah.
there?
There's plenty of poaching, plenty of shenanigans going on. People not abiding the rules or breaking the rules, only because our fishing game presence is very small. You'll
Yeah.
have one warden for like 40, 50 miles of water.
Same
You
with
know what I mean?
same
And
with
it's
New
like,
York City. It's rough. There's just
yeah, it's
not enough
tough. So
boots
you
on the
gotta,
ground.
yeah. So it's tough. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are going against the striped bass here, and there's a lot of smearing campaign going on right now,
What do
and
you
we're trying
mean?
to erase that. Change. Oh well, anyhow, I told you that there's a transfer of water that goes through the middle of California and goes to Southern
Yeah.
California.
Yeah.
So if you look at the map of California, you get into the Central Valley, which is like Stockton, Modesto, and then you start going way south. All that land is like dry desert land for the most part. But they turned that dry once you started getting a big canal water coming down your backyard. They're like, hey, why can't we use that water? So they started creating all that desert land turned into farmland. So now all that water is being used. They pick out of that water and they use it for farmland, and that's just big profits. I mean, so the problem with that is when you pull water, the salt water starts to move up, where that fresh water would crash against the salt water, and it keeps it down into the bays. That salt water starts to move up, and then also that fresh water doesn't maintain its levels, so the spawning areas get lower. The rivers don't are not as big as they used to be because they're pulling so much water as well. Um, so the issue there is the farmers, they don't care about the fishery. They just want more profits. They want more fucking. They're like, dude, we had this desert land that nobody wanted, and we hit a home run. Now we have water. Now we can make big profits, right? So now that they have that, so they put in campaigns to try to almost kill the fisheries, where they make like false propaganda and advertisement and reports and this and that. They can afford the lawyers, they can afford all that stuff. So they put the salmon fishermen and the striper fishermen that are around against each other. So they basically said the reason your salmon fisheries is declining is because the stripers are eating all the salmon. Yeah. So, but they coexisted for many years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's not that the reason why the salmon population has gone down is because we're losing so much water in the spawning areas. It's just
Mm.
the habitats are not there. But the striper population has crashed as well. So it's like if if stripers were thriving, they wouldn't. Their population would actually be going up
Yeah.
versus it going down. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. It doesn't make
it,
sense.
it, it, but so they'll put that stuff in. You know how media is. That people only read the headlines.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then they'll repeat that like it's fact. They'll be like, "Oh, I saw where freaking stripers are invasive, and they're killing the salmon population." And it's like, dude, did you spend some time to actually read into the details or do your own research?
No.
Like I've just recently, it's funny. A guy made a comment on a Facebook group, like a fishing page, and it was totally wrong. And I said, "Hey, man, I just letting you know what you're saying is incorrect. It's this way and this way, and to back up what I'm talking about, here's a link to an actual document from Fish and Game." I said, "Go ahead and do your research and and educate yourself, and before it goes even saying some stuff." I didn't want to be a like an asshole about it, but I just said, "Hey, this is what you're saying is wrong. Here's what the truth is, and here's my backup document to support what I'm saying. Go ahead and read it for yourself, and then you can come to your own conclusion." The guy got pissed off, and he's like, "Oh, you're just trying to, just took it the wrong way." And it's like, look, man, spreading information, wrong information, is not cool at all either.
No
I mean,
way.
that's how
No.
you got young kids who are reading this stuff, and if
They
they
just
think what you're
believe
saying is
shit.
fact,
Yeah.
they'll just regurgitate what you're saying, which is
Exactly.
wrong, and that's how So yeah, so that's where we're at the battle right now. It's basically we're trying to make regulation changes here to have a slot limit for striped bass. Um, we just put a petition in. Just we've been working it for like 2 years now. We'd like it to be, somewhere around 25 inches to 35 inches. But at this point, honestly, if they said 22 to 30 or whatever, I'm okay with that. I mean, whatever we could get, and then you adjust as the time goes on. But anything's better than what we have. 18-inch and up is free. Free for everybody.
Yeah.
Anything's better than that. We haven't had any regulatory change in 30 years, which is freaking mind blowing.
Yeah, that's wild.
How could you have no regulatory change over 30 years? You're telling me that the information, technology, equipment, um, fishing has been the same for 30 years? It's impossible. There's so much information. We got better gear, better electronics, better information sharing. All these forums, Facebook groups, Instagram, you got a plethora of information. So the learning curve for a fisherman is a lot smaller. When I was fishing at a young age, I didn't
Yeah.
have YouTube. I didn't have
No, none of that.
all this stuff. I remember riding my bike to the library to learn about fish. I would check out a book and go to the Rolodex. I mean, so you had to spend the learning curve was a lot smaller. You know, I and it would show me how to make knots, and because when I started fishing, I didn't even know how to tie knots. I would do an overhand knot over
Yeah.
like 3-4 times, and then I'd wonder why my hook would come off. You know what I mean? So I had to learn to teach myself, and like I said, I had to go to a library and actually check out a book on how to tie knots, and then I would practice that. You know what I mean? So my learning curve was a lot bigger versus now. You can just type in on YouTube and how to tie any kind of knot, and there's so many videos on that. You know what I mean? So the anglers now are just a lot more proficient compared to 30 years ago. So to have no regulatory change on a consistent basis, it's ludicrous.
It
I think
is.
you should have a regulatory change, or at least be considered or looked at every 5 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say every 3 to 5. It's,
Yeah, because you have to
30
adjust to
years.
the times.
They might as well tell you they just don't give a fuck about it.
Yeah, basically, man. You know what I mean? so so
Oh
yeah, that's what
man.
we run into. So, like I said, um, you know, I usually have pretty good luck finding fish, bigger fish, but it's a grind, man.
Yeah.
There's been times I go out 10, 12 times and not even a bump.
Damn.
And that's hard to stay motivated, but I'm okay with that because I was taught by the old school. I was taught by one of the best West Coast fishermen out here, Mike Fixter, and he showed me how to learn from the grind. You are always learning, whether you're catching or not. You're learning something. You're learning how the water moves. You're learning how the bottom of the structure of where you're fishing feels like. So not catching
Yeah.
is not a total waste of time because you are learning something. You're learning what that jig feels like when it's bumping on the bottom of the gravel. what it's doing, or how to not touch the bottom, or how to slightly touch the bottom. You're always learning something. So as an angler, it made me a really refined angler. And I think sometimes that on the younger anglers, they may miss that opportunity because they just want to go watch a YouTube video, go somewhere and get results.
Yeah, and just have a picture
So
to
they
post
won't
on the
get that
gram.
fine finesse touch that they would typically learn from, by just putting in the grind and the time. What I mean, so it's
Yep.
not always about catching. In the long run, it's going to help you be more successful years down the road because your approach is going to be very fine tuned and very finesse. So
Absolutely. And you'll be ready for all types of situations.
correct.
You wouldn't have to look at a YouTube video to understand what type of situation you're in or whatever. You'll just know from experience.
Exactly that. That is why I like traveling all over the United States to fish for striped bass. That's all I fish for is striped bass. But to me, it's like a challenge going into a whole new body of water and saying, okay, this is my conditions. Okay, let me throw out a feeler lure. Let me see what the bottom feels like. Let me see, what I'm running into. Like, I'll try to identify that, do a little bit of research, look at Google Maps, see where I feel the water's coming in or coming out. Look at the tides, and look at all the variables, and then I'll try to put my years of experience and okay, maybe I should bring these lures, and then I'll throw those lures and see what my results are. So I may go into a certain area and bring like 20 lures, but the next day, I'm only probably bringing like 10 because I boiled them down. Like, I don't need those, but I need these. Then I may
Yeah.
bring on a couple more of the lures. Like, damn, if I had this, I think this might work here. So as I start approaching a certain area on a regular basis for 2, 3, 4 days, I start eliminating what I need and what I don't need. So,
I'm looking at this post on your page now about fishing in Tennessee. I
mhm.
noticed it when I was looking through your page. And you went, in terms of what you had to get for the gear to catch the fish on that trip, it looks like you went all out. Like you even had an order from Tackle Warehouse or
Yes.
whatever it
That
was.
was a that was like a trip from hell, man. So we went in. I went with my buddy Edgar, who's a phenomenal fisherman as well. Very, very, very good fisherman. He fishes all across the United States as well. He goes, you know, fishes for tarpon, snook, tuna, stripers. I mean, he loves his fucking fishing. He's a really good shore fisherman as well. He's gotten like white sea bass from shore, which is almost like really impossible
I
for,
caught one of
especially.
those.
Yeah. Um, so me and him went, and we planned. We were like, okay, what lures you're bringing? Okay, I'm bringing this, and I'm bringing this, and okay, I'm gonna bring this, and we thought we had our bases covered, right? And we get there, and to make a long story short, everything that we brought, we threw a lot of it, but we soon found out it had no use. We zero of what we brought and had. We soon realized like we can't use this stuff here. We identified what we needed, and we're like, okay, and it was so frustrating because it's like I got boxes and bins of this stuff that we need back home. You know what I mean? And it's like it didn't occur to me that we should have brought this. So we're like, okay, let's go to a tackle shop and see if we can find what we need. We go to the tackle shop, and we're aiming to catch 40, 50 pound striped bass. So we're not looking to use a light wire largemouth bass hook, and that's all we could find is fucking light wire hooks. We couldn't find anything that was like a strong, mustad hook or something like that. And if we did find it, it was on a huge jig head, like a 3, 4 ounce jig head. And we're just like, dude, it's too heavy, and it's either too light of a hook or too heavy of a weight that we couldn't do the right presentation. So we went to 5 different tackle shops. We drove 4 hours from where we were staying at, and we could not find what we needed. Um, and I got really frustrated. And I said, so I got to a point. I got onto Tackle Warehouse website, and I found and even then they didn't have exactly what I needed, but it was better than what I was finding. So I put an order in for what I felt would get us by. Did an overnight to the hotel, and I had them overnight. That same day, we went to another taco shop, which was about 4 hours away, and we ran into this guy. And we were telling him our scenario. We're chasing after big stripers. The problem is we're in fast current, shallow water, rocky bottom, but there's big fish there, but we have to put the pressure on them, or if not, we're going to lose them because we're fishing for shore. It's not like we could catch them off a boat and just follow them. When you're shore, rocky bottom, you can't just traverse over the rocky area as quick, and it's fast moving current. You know what I mean? So it was tough. You know what I mean? It was a crazy scenario that we were stuck in, and the guy was like, "Okay, well, what size jig heads do you need?" And we told him what size we wanted and what kind, and we wanted a specific size and style. And then I said, "Do you have the hooks?" And he goes, he had a whole plethora of hooks, and he's all, "Pick out the hooks you want." And he goes, "Here's my heavy duty ones." And he goes, "Whatever size jig head you want, I'll make it for you custom. You tell me how many you want." We're like, "Okay, we'll take 100 of those." We were taking 100 of these and another 50 of these. So we just stocked up like big time, because the problem is where we're fishing, it's very snaggy. And that's like the demoralizing part. My buddy Edgar will tell you, he goes, "I fished Sebastian Inlet, which is one of the hardest ways to fish or areas to fish and land like a
I
big
love that
tarpon, but the
place.
possibility
I
is
love
there
that
to
place,
catch
man.
100+ pound tarpon. But
Yeah, definitely.
there's so many things going against you. And
Oh,
if
the
that fish
current, the
doesn't move
rocks,
to the
fucking
right,
sharks, all types of
yeah.
shit there. Every
So he fishes
obstacle
that on a regular
imaginable.
basis. He said this fishing here has no comparison to, they're like, this is an ass kicking compared to what I'm used to in Sebastian. He's all, this is one of the worst situations because it's fast moving water, it's shallow, and it's rocky. So it was demoralizing because you would snag, break off, tie in another, tie a fresh new leader, tie on your jig head, and first cast you're snagged again. Try doing that 10 to 15 times on the session, and you're just demoralized because
Oh,
you're
it'll
just like,
break your
man,
spirit. Oh my
yeah,
god.
it breaks your spirit because you're just like, man, I just want like 2, 3 drifts, man, that don't get stuck. So it was tough.
And then you start to get hesitant about setting the hook, when you finally
Correct.
do get a bite because you're worried you're just going to get snagged again. So you
Yeah,
start to like
but we
hesitate a
figured it
little.
out. We figured it out. We battled through it. We were actually doing better than the guys on the boat, and the guys on the boat were just like, "What the hell are these guys doing?" And they're like, "What? You know what I mean?" So we were catching 30, 40 pound stripers, we figured it out, but we literally lost probably 4 days of fishing because we just didn't have the right tools. So that was like the frustrating part.
That's crazy.
But like I said, that's just part of using your experience and trying to figure it out. So yeah.
So yeah, that's a
So
crazy
if I
trip.
ever got it, the idea of going back, I know what to
You
bring
know
this time
exactly what
around.
to
You know what I
do.
mean? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh man, that's crazy. So let's talk a little bit about the plugs that you build, the lures that you build. I have a question here that my friend Scott submitted, and he would like to know, Orlando, how do you prioritize creativity and ingenuity in an industry that is so saturated? Specifically regarding your new colored core idea that virtually eliminates the issue of hook rash on your plugs.
It's just that that's just the way my mind thinks, man. When I'm looking at to create something different, it's just out of need, and it's just like how like when I created that color core, it's basically I was just thinking like, okay, I hate the way a lure looks when it has hook rash. You know what I mean? In a way, it's kind of good. In a way, it's bad. In a way, it's where I'm saying it's good. It looks like an injured bait fish, right? It just looks like battle scar. It's been beat up, and so in a way, that's why it's like some people's most productive lures do really good when they're all beat up and whatnot. Because if you think about it, it looks like a really jacked up bait fish that's been beat up. You know, it's on its last string. Um, so in that aspect of it, it looks cool. You know, that's good. But visually, sometimes those lures just look like, God dang, you know, these the don't look, you know, especially on like wooden ones that are just all scarred up and whatnot. So when I had the opportunity, I was creating my darter, and made out of resin. The core of it was white, and I was like, and I was just like, why not do some research and find out how I could change that color? That way, when it does get hook rash, it looks like it's bleeding. So I'm taking an injured look, but now I have with that red pink core, it looks like it's that injured part is highlighted now. It's not just white. You know what I mean? Now it's coming up a little bit reddish pinkish. Now that hook rash looks like it's injured. Looks like it's almost bleeding. It has a scar.
That's
You know what I
awesome.
mean?
So let me get this
So
straight. So you're sorry. So you're saying that the paint of like the blood or whatever is underneath the main paint. So as the or underneath the main resin, I'm not really sure, but as the hook kind of chafes away at the lure, this color gets revealed. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Okay.
And it's not paint. It's what it is. It'd be almost be like if you could dye wood. Like you're just dyeing the core. So let's say you have like a tannish color wood and you're dyeing it a red color. So when it gets and from the core, not just the outside, all the way through. So when you are chipping away at it, it's not just the outside as you're chipping away that's that red color and then it goes into the regular natural color. No. On this product, as you're chipping away, it still stays that true red color. So So yeah, that was just like me thinking like why make something that why not make something highlight it even more and make it a good thing? You know what I mean? So, people are like, oh man, how do I fix the hook rash and stuff? It's all because they don't like the way it looks. But if I can make it look like it's a bite mark or injured or scar, they're gonna be like, hell, I just want to fish it the way it is. They don't. That's one less thing to worry about. It's almost
Exactly.
you look like rewarding yourself. I want to get that lure all beat up and scar looking because it's gonna look badass.
So you want to keep using it. Yeah.
Correct. Correct.
It's genius. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So
Where
yeah,
where do you get the wood from?
that just came up to me like I'm just, I'm always looking for ways to improve stuff. You know what I mean? And it's all because it's like when I'm fishing out in the water, when I'm not catching anything, when I'm just casting to nothing, I'm always thinking like, damn, if I had this or this, you have so much time to yourself. I'm constantly thinking of like how I could improve things for myself.
Yeah.
And then I don't just make stuff and then like, hey, throw it upon all these guys that buy my lures and say, hey, go ahead and try it out. All my lures are tested by myself. You
Yeah.
know, what I mean, I get a lot of guys that tell me, hey, send me some lures, I'll test it for you, dude. No offense, but I feel like I'm my best critic. You know what I mean when it comes to
Yeah.
testing it and knowing
Yeah.
how to work. And I'll test it in freshwater. I'll test it in the river. I'll test it in the surf. I'll test it in the back bay. I want to know where it shines and where it doesn't shine. Okay, and if I make changes to it, where does it shine and doesn't shine, and why? And that's those details. Sometimes you won't get from an angler. You give an angler a lure. No offense to some of those guys, they'll just tell you, "Hey, the lure works great."
Yeah.
Or, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? I love it.
That's all the
I call out
feedback you're
this. Well,
getting.
that doesn't help me on my design and making minor changes. You know what I mean? So generally, I just kind of rely on myself to learn that stuff, and that's why I have as a fisherman, I'm constantly looking at ideas in my head how to improve things, dude. I modify so many lures, even existing lures or jigs or whatnot. Um, there's a lot of stuff I keep near and dear to me that I don't tell people how I modify things just because I just don't like sharing that stuff. Maybe when I'm
Yeah.
older and I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
fish no more, I'll let the cat out the bag and let other people enjoy it. But for now, I just keep them near and dear to me because some of those stuff just took me so many years to learn or figure out.
Yeah. It's not even
Um,
like it was just a couple trips. We're talking about a few years. Some of these
Yeah.
things that you learned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some are even 20 plus years of
Yeah.
experience. You know what I mean? So so I just take them. Some stuff I like to keep near and dear to me and tight lipped. I'll share them with maybe like a guy I fish with. I don't fish with a lot of people. I only have a couple guys I fish out here on the West Coast, and then there's only a couple guys when I fish on the East Coast. I don't fish with a lot of people. Um, they have to be think along the same lines as you. Be conservative for our fishery. Want to grind as hard. I mean, typically guys I fish with, if I tell them, hey, we're gonna fish 12 hours today, okay, no problem. You know what I mean? Those are the guys I usually line up with. You know what I mean? I've taken guys out like they're like, hey, I want to learn or I want to try surf fishing or whatnot. And an hour, 2 hours into walking the surf, they're just freaking hunched over on a log, sitting down. They're like, dude, I'm tired. This is exhausting. And I'm like, yeah, man, it's not like how I fish is not it's not your typical at most people's levels. You know what I mean?
This ain't summertime golf course largemouth bass fishing, buddy.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Because with stripers, you gotta always be on the move, in my opinion. They're either there or they're not. You know what I mean? You try your different presentations. You try your top, mid, column, deep,
Read the water the
slow,
whole time,
sweep,
looking
sideways,
for any
flood, the
sign.
ebb. You
Yeah,
try your different techniques, and if you're not getting the results, you need to move. You know.
absolutely.
So yeah.
And sometimes you could move everywhere and they
And
still
they're just
won't
not
be
there. You know what
there.
I mean? Yeah. And that's okay. You know what I mean? Because, like I said earlier, by trying all those different techniques to find out where you are and you're throwing in different bodies of water, you are learning, man. And one of those techniques is going to pay off down the road. You're going to learn how your lure moves on a sweep or on a rocky bottom or bumping it or whatever it may be. You're going to learn something. And one of those days that you're out fishing and you're trying a technique that you're comfortable with, is going to pay off for you. That's what you have to think as when you're fishing. Don't always think about the catching. You have to refine your skill set. You have to be fine tuned. That's why, like, you know, there's some amazing anglers out there. They catch some really good fish, and sometimes they're just really, and lucky they're in a good area. There's a lot of fish, but it also takes a little bit of skill of knowing how to make that a presentation.
Yeah.
And some guys are super consistent. It's because they've refined the technique that works for them in those areas.
Who are some of the guys that you think are like, some of the best guys out right now? Not of all time. I'm not talking about like Alberto, Skinner.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the guys that are out now, really putting in the time, really winning. Like who are some of the guys that you really respect in the game right now?
Frank Gonzalez. I think he's a really good, phenomenal angler on the East Coast. The guy knows his waters pretty good when it comes to surf fishing. That the guy knows basically how to. He has it pretty dialed in for the most part. The guy knows how to freaking fish. I've met him. I've talked to him plenty of times, and he's a really good fisherman. I have a buddy of mine, Dan Coughlin, really good boat fisherman, man. That guy has it dialed in. That guy has a photo album book. I think he might have 3 photo album books, and there's like 5, 6 pictures in each page, and there's like 40, 50 pound fish in every single freaking page. And it's phenomenal. He showed me that one day, and I was like, holy crap. And he's like, yeah, this is like, almost 15 years of fishing. And the guy is a freaking fish magnet, phenomenal fisherman. Everybody has a certain technique they're good here, whether they're boat, kayak, shore fishermen, river. Everybody has a technique. Where they're super good. You know what I mean?
Feel like
You
you're
know,
trying. Do you feel like you're trying to get good at all of the techniques? Like you're
I am.
trying. Yeah.
That is my goal.
Yeah.
That it's not just being good at the surf, because I know guys that'll fish a surf and you throw them into a river system and they're lost. You know what I mean? They're like completely lost, and they're just like, they'll try to use the same techniques that they're using in the surf in another body of water. And it can work sometimes, but sometimes it's a waste of time. That's why, like, I have probably over 40 rods and reels, and they're all refined. I have bait casters that I use. I probably have about 20 of those, and they're all used for different techniques, different areas that I'm fishing or whatnot. I have all kinds of surf rods. I have all kinds of, I have, 11 footers, 10 and a half footers, 10 footers, 9 footers, 9 foot six. I mean, it's really like refined as far as like where and why I'm going to use it. You know, um, typically I don't like using too light of a gear. When I'm chasing for stripers, I'm always in the mindset that my very next cast is going to be that 50 plus pounder. So if I don't have the gear that I feel that could bring in that fish in an adequate time, you can land a 50-pound fish with a steelhead rod and freaking 10-pound test, but it's going to take you half an hour, 45 minutes to land it. That's not my intention.
Then
I'm
it's
trying
going
to
to take
land
you
this.
another half hour to revive it.
Correct, and it probably is. Even if you try reviving, it's a dead fish because
Yeah.
you've exhausted it,
Yeah.
and it's done. You brought it into its death, basically. So my goal generally is to land a fish under 2 minutes. I'm trying to freaking. If I hook into a big fish, I know the first run. I'm not gonna try to force my way on her. I'll let her do what she wants to do in her first run. She's gonna do what she wants. I don't care who you are or how you are. You're not gonna be able to change what she wants to do in the beginning. She has that initial shock. She's gonna do whatever is in her intuition to stay alive. So she's gonna do what she wants. Once she makes that first run, after the second run, that's where I come in play. That's where my experience and my technique is gonna come in play, and that's where I take charge. And like I said, I generally try to keep them within 1 minute, 2 minutes landed, if not even quicker. It all depends on how close, how far. There's a lot of different scenarios, but I try to keep my fights. That's why I don't play with like light gear. On my bait caster setups, I'm using either a 300 or 400 size reel, 65 to 80-pound braid, 60-pound leader, 80-pound clip. I mean, it's serious hardware. I'm not trying to
And
freaking
nothing's
like.
getting away from that.
No. And then like on my surf setups, because of I'm using a spinning rod, I need a little bit more distance sometimes in the surf. So I'll use like 45 to 40-pound test. I'll use a 50 to 60-pound leader, same 80-pound clip. But generally I like, a little bit stronger rod. Like one of my favorite surf rods is a Century Stealth, the 2 to 5, the 11 footer. I like that rod because I could throw half ounce all the way to 5 ounce. And then what I like about that moderate action on that rod is on a big fish, it acts like a spring. So when she jolts or rolls or pulls, that it's a moderate action rod, so it acts like a shock absorber. So I just keep that pressure on her. But when she does an invasive, like crazy action or movement, it's not a pop out of the rod. On a fast action tip, you get that pop, and that's how they can pop loose. Correct. So in the surf, that is like my go-to rod. I use other rods, of course, but like if you tell me, hey Orlando, what's one rod you're gonna use to surf? It's that. I pair that up with a Daiwa Saltiga 8000, the high speed one. I like the high speed pickup because I use the bend of my rod to put that pressure, and I use the speed of my line pickup on my high speed reel to pick up that cushion that I created. So it's pressure pulling back, pick up on the reel, pressure pulling back. I don't just hold the reel, just retrieve. I'm using my tools. I'm using the pressure of my bend on my rod and the fast pickup of the reel to shorten that gap every time. Some guys just hold the rod and just retrieve. That's not my technique because you're not using your tools. You know what I mean?
So yeah, let's keep talking a little bit about the gear that you're using.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, I like using that surf setup. That's probably my favorite. And then on my bait casters, I either use either a Dio or Tatula from freshwater, or I'm using a Shimano Tranks for saltwater. And those they're all 30 to 50 pound sticks. They're anywhere from 7.5 foot to 9 foot. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I I've taken some of my baitcaster setups to New Jersey. I fished the Raritan Bay with a baitcaster setup, and that, like, all my friends, they were like, "Dude, a baitcaster? Like what?"
Yeah,
And
yeah,
but once they saw what I was doing, they're like, "Dude, that is so sick!" And then they're like, they're like asking me like, "Hey, what's your setup and what do you recommend?" Because now they see that, because on a baitcaster setup, sometimes you don't even have to create the action off the movement of your rod. You could just do it by that, moving the handle at a certain speed and cadence. Like sometimes, like to walk a topwater plug with a baitcaster, it's just this technique that I'm turning the handle and the speed. The rod's not even moving; it's pointed to the water, and it's just how I'm turning the handle, and it's creating that topwater action. There's so many different techniques that are involved, from a spinning setup to a baitcaster, that are just 90-day different. It just makes your life easier, and to me, when I'm off a boat, I typically like to use a bait caster setup, because just simple details like that. I feel like I'm more connected with the bait cast. I can feel the line through my rod and through my palm. I usually kind of cup the reel so I can feel everything that's going on. I can feel the lure swimming. Like I'm fishing a swim bait, I can literally feel whether the lure is moving to the left or to the right. I can feel that movement. It's just a lot more connected, and that just comes with a lot of practice and feel
yeah.
experience with that stuff. Um, so yeah, those are like my favorite setups. I like using baitcaster from shore as well, if possible. Um, if it's super shallow, I'll use a baitcaster. If it's deeper water, I'll probably go with like a surf setup. Saltwater surf, I'm using a spinning rod setup for sure.
Yeah.
The baitcasters in saltwater surf environment, they don't hold up, because if you have that worm gear that moves your line across your spool on a baitcaster setup. That worm gear, if it gets a little granular of sand in there, it just jacks everything up. So typically, a baitcaster in a sandy beach setup is not ideal. So that's why most people are using in the surface spinning setup, because you don't have to worry about a exposed gear getting sand in it. So I was really hoping that this time around that Van Staal would, what they came out with this new VSX2.
Yeah, like the
I
new
heard
golden
rumors
one or
about it
whatever.
like a couple years ago, and I was really hoping. And I've talked to the Van Staal guys. I'm like, you guys need to make a high gear setup. There's no reason why. All your gearing, like, I typically like my pickup per rotation on my reels to be around 40 inches to 42 inches per rotation. But if I could achieve that on a 200 or 150 size reel, that would be phenomenal, because then I don't have to have a 275 or 300 to accomplish that. So it'd be a little bit more lighter setup, so I could make more casts, have less fatigue. But when you have to carry such a lot more bigger reel to accomplish that puts some wear and tear on you. You know what I
It
mean?
definitely
And if
does.
you're only fishing an hour or two, it's not a big deal. But when you're putting in long hours of session, that puts some wear and tear on you.
No, it
So I
definitely
was
does.
really hoping that Van Staal would have done that, and they didn't, and I was really disappointed, because the opportunity is there. I think that would have made their reels options just at a whole new level. Having a low speed gear and a high speed gear, I think they missed the ball right there, in my opinion. Um, it'd be nice to see them do something like that, because then they would have had me on board. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
Because I use a Saltiga, I beat the hell out of my Saltigas in the surf. I dunk them, I swim them. I, but I always bring 2 to 3. I have like 5 saltigas, but I usually on trips I'll bring like 2 of them or as a backup. I never had to use one as a backup, but I always had that like if I beat it up and it goes bad, I'm gonna have that. There could be, that can happen. You know what I mean? So, but I never had it happen. That's why I used to use a lot of Stellas. But to me, Stellas are a great Shimano Stellas are a great boat reel. But for saltwater surf, it is not doesn't even compare to a Saltiga. So no, and the Saltigas I've been using them for God, I want to say like 7 years now. And they've performed flawless for me. Um, yeah, they can. The bail on them is super thick. If you look at it on a Stella, it's really thin wire versus the bail on a Saltiga is like super thick. They're just built to me a lot more stronger, a lot more better. They're not built to dunk, but they can handle a dunk. You know what I mean? The only thing I do is when I'm done after the end of the year that I'm done using them or whatnot, I just send them back to Dial, have them refresh it, and they send them back to me. And I've asked those guys because I know all the guys at Dial, and I ask them, hey, let me know how the reel looks, and they just be like, dude, it looks fucking great. We just refreshened it, put new bearings or refresh it, put new gear, and all that, and yeah, everything's good. We didn't have to replace much, which is it's kind of good to hear that, So,
Yeah, definitely.
but it's definitely not the tool to if you're going to be out swimming to a rock, in a wetsuit, and you're going to be dunking like all night and stuff. It's definitely not the tool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Do you do that
I
a
do
lot?
some of that when I'm out on the East Coast, but
Uh-huh.
not a whole lot. Not at the level that I know guys that do. I'm talking high level.
Like these guys
The
swim
right
out
tool is
really
going to be a
far.
Van Staal, and those guys are using a Van Staal 300. If they had a high gear, I guarantee those guys would be running probably a 200. You know what I mean?
So those Van Stals, they can take the dunks. They can
Yeah,
go out to the
yeah,
rocks and all
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do you do that when you come out to the East Coast? Do you do the swim out
I
to the
go out
rock
to the
thing?
boulder fields and I'll swim out to some of them. I wetsuit it, but not at the level. There's levels to that game, man. Okay, I would put myself. Okay, I recently ran into a few badass anglers out on the East Coast. Um, John Bruno would be is the guy I'm talking about. I thought my saltwater surf game was. If I had to give it a number, I would 1 to 10. I'd say I'd give it like an 8. When I met John Bruno, this guy's a badass dude. He's probably one of the best Long Island surfcasters, that we have in our young generation. The, After meeting him, I felt like I was a 5. You know what I mean? There's levels to the game. I was like, holy shit. Like, I gave him my rod, and I was literally scared that he was going to break my rod. The guy is a freaking animal, dude. Um, Yeah, there's levels to this game. I mean, it humbled me. It was very humbling, fishing with that guy. You just when you think you're good, there's always somebody better, man.
Oh, it's so
Which is it,
true. So
so
true.
the guy's pretty hardcore. We talk for hours. I mean, we still talk to this day, and the the amount of knowledge and information that guy goes through and knows is unbelievable. There's literally guys that will stalk him and try to follow him to where he fishes just
Oh, I
because they know
believe
that
it.
this guy catches big fish.
There's a
You know
lot of
what I mean? So
stalkers out there. I wonder if any of
yeah,
these stalkers listen to the show.
yeah.
'Cause
That's why he doesn't have no multimedia. He doesn't have Facebook. He doesn't have
good
Instagram. He
for
doesn't have
him.
none of that. I mean, he's a young guy. And typically, all young guys have that. And he's
Yeah,
just like,
yeah.
no, I don't. He goes, I don't want no part of that, man. Freaking. He goes, I'll go on my sister's account and kind of like browse through and look at what's the latest or whatnot. But he goes, yeah, I don't have my personal stuff, man.
That's
You know.
great.
But yeah,
So
if you could interview that guy, which I don't know if he'll talk though,
yeah, that's the other thing.
but
What's
he
his
that
name?
guy,
Johnny what?
John Bruno.
John Bruno.
Yeah, if you look at the Montauk uh, tournament they have every year, he's always in the top 3 for
Is
the
that
last 10 years.
is that the
Last 10
Surf
years.
Rats ball or is that a different one?
No, not the Surf Rats ball. That Montauk has like a Surfcasters tournament, and they have like different categories. They have like surf casting with waders, and he's usually in the surf casting in a wetsuit.
Oh, okay.
And he's for the last 10 years, he's probably like top 3 every year.
That's amazing. Yeah, I would love to
Yeah,
talk to
he's
him.
basically got top from all the guys that you watch. You know that good documentary, Running the Coast.
Yeah. Yep.
A few of those guys basically took him under their wing, and he's learned from those guys in the classic way. So
Lucky him.
yeah,
He's definitely
yeah.
putting his time though.
Yeah. So if you ask me, who's a good fisherman out in the East Coast that I admire,
Yeah.
that'd be another one. That guy, he's at a whole different level. I've never met a fisherman at his level. It was pretty eye opening, and
Why
it was
is he
kind
at
of cool.
such a different level? What are some of the attributes
The
that set him
details,
apart?
it's just the super details. He'll go out, swim to a rock, knowing that it's not the time to be on that rock 4 or 5 hours before it's time, just to learn what the water's doing and how it's moving on a certain wind or tide or swell or any of that stuff. He wants to feel what the water's doing. He wants to see what the water's doing. He knows he's not going to catch anything for 4 or 5 hours, but he's feeling what that water's doing. Somebody to have that type of dedication and knowing they're not going to catch, and it's going to be 4 or 5 hours before they actually going to make a true cast. That takes some serious dedication, man.
Yeah,
But
it
he
does.
knows what that water does on so many specific situations that he has it pretty dialed in, man. That's why
crazy.
he's successful. You know what I mean? Because he's able, like I said, he was taught by the old school. He gets to feel. He knows the way that water feels. He'll swim out to the rock. He's the guy that you're making your cast from shore off a rock, and you think there's nobody out at the end of your cast, and he's the guy at the end of your cast, like on a rock that you didn't know was there. And
That's
he's
awesome.
fishing the outer edge where typically there's boat guys.
That's crazy, man. That's so sketchy.
It's a whole different level. I'd never freaking. It's a whole different level. People say, "Oh yeah, I surf cat." No, his level of surf casting is a whole different level, man.
I mean,
Would I do something like that myself? No, man. I'm too old, man. I don't have the enough. I don't have the experience or like. It's a very risky. If I were to have done something like that, I would have to have done when I was younger.
Absolutely.
I'm not
There's
willing to put myself in that situation at this point. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, I'll swim out to a rock, but you don't understand. You swim out to a rock, like I said, and you make a cast, and he's at the end of your cast on that other rock out there that you didn't even know existed.
That's crazy.
So, yeah.
I mean, I've heard, like I'm really good friends with Alberto, and Alberto has told me, he'll go to a spot and he won't even cast. He'll watch the entire tide come in and out just to see how it works. But I mean, to swim out to the rock and be one with the rock for that whole tide, that's fucking crazy.
Yeah, that's what I was just like, yeah, I'm a 5.
Yeah.
It's just when you think you know your stuff. I was like, yeah, that 8 that I thought I was. Yeah, I'm a 5.
We're gonna have to keep working on that.
Yeah.
That's great, man. So, one question I tried to get in before was where do you get the wood for your plugs? Like, how do you source the wood for that?
I actually drive to the state of Washington and get it direct from the source. Yeah, I get direct from I don't go through a third party, I get direct. So I call them and I tell them exactly what I want, what sizes I want, how I want it cut, what quality of wood I want. And I make the drive. It's about 14 hours one way and 14 hours one way back. And I usually pick up about 2,000 linear feet per trip. So yeah,
that's wild.
Yeah, it's a big commitment.
How did you find that? How did you find that plug or that connect for your plugs?
Well, I typically use when I'm making a wooden plug, I'm using Alaskan yellow cedar. And that is on. I use Alaskan yellow cedar because I was taught by Mike Fixter, and he's the man who discovered Alaskan yellow cedar over 50 years ago. You know, the reason why people use Alaskan yellow cedar now is Mike Fixter, and he's been building plugs out here on the West Coast for over 50 years. And he has an amazing story on how he stumbled upon it. But basically, he has a lot of friends and whatnot. And a friend of him said, "Hey, I got some extra piece of wood here." Because back then they would just use whatever they had, whatever they could get their hands on. We're talking over 50 years ago, man. So, whatever they could get, whether it's maple or basswood or whatever they could get their hands on. Nobody had like, oh, it has to be this wood. People would make lures back in those days on whatever they could get. Nobody was really kind of like it had to be this specific wood. Um, so a friend of his kind of told him, it'd be nice for to hear his side of the story, but I'll kind of tell you. Is basically a friend told him, here's some Alaskan yellow cedar that I had. He goes, I don't know if it'd be any good, but we use it all the time for decking. It's pretty water resistant. He's all maybe you should, here's a big slab. You give him a big piece of slab of it, and cut it up and see how it works. And on maybe it might work for some lures. So yeah, so he cut it up and started turning it on the lathe. And he was like, "Damn, this stuff turns like butter." I mean, it was like real smooth. It wasn't harsh, and so he started making lures out of that. Started testing them, and he started noticing, like, "Damn, these lures have a lot more better action than these other woods that I'm using." You know what I mean? It's a little more lively, a little more buoyant. It doesn't take on water, so he started making. He started figuring out how to get some more of that wood. And back in those days, you didn't have Google or any of that stuff to resource or stuff. A lot of it was making phone calls to different places, looking it up on the yellow pages on who was local. You know what I mean? So that took a lot of work for him to figure out on where he could source that. And then once he found a source for it, he started using it, and that's how he kind of started making his lures. I want to say that this probably happened in the 80s when he discovered Alaskan. Don't quote me on it, but I think it's around the 80s that he discovered Alaskan yellow cedar, and he started using it. And then he ran with that from there. From that day on, that's all he used his lures. He used to make his lures with all Alaskan yellow cedar. So now a lot of the newer builders and young builders, they think it's just like hey, what wood should I use? It's automatic. Hey, you should use Alaskan yellow cedar. And why is it? It's because of a gentleman like Mike Pfister discovered that and found out that that was the premium wood to use. It is not always the best wood to use for certain lures, but for the most part, I would say 90% of the lure makers out there, they're using Alaskan yellow cedar. So that has to say something. If I'm in my mind throwing a 1 ounce bucktail, that is a 1 ounce with a trailer. Not a 1 ounce jig head with bucktail and a trailer, because then it's like an ounce and a quarter. Does that make sense?
When you say
So
trailer, do you mean teaser or?
correct.
Okay,
Not the
gotcha.
teaser, but the trailer that goes on the hook of your bucktail.
Yes. Okay, gotcha.
So it's dialed in as a total weight. So what I do is I typically tie my own bucktails, but what I do is, let's say I have a 1 ounce jig head, right, for a bucktail. I add a trailer, I weigh it. If it's an ounce, let's say it's 1.1 ounces, right? What I'll do is I'll take a drill and I'll drill little eye sockets on both sides of the bucktail jig to take lead out till it gets to a perfect 1 ounce. So now my jig head is dialed into 1 ounce. So if you look at my surf bag when I know I'm using bucktails, I have 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce, ounce and a quarter, ounce and a half, ounce and 3/4. But it's dialed into that exact weight with the trailer.
Are you using TA clips to rotate these in and out quickly?
Correct. Yes. I don't use the TA clips per se. I use the style. I used to use a lot of the breakaway 80-pound clip for the most part. They're kind of like the original company that started doing that. Started using the BKK clip. I like those a little bit more.
Does it look like the TA clip?
It kind of does, but it has a top
Interesting.
indentation, so you're not kind of get stuck if it tries to slide down. So if you search on Tackle Direct BKK Snap, you'll see what they look like. They did have a little bit of a production issue that the clip didn't extend far out enough to the middle to where you could attach it. I had some inconsistencies where they was too short and it was hard to get a lure on.
Uh-huh.
So I wrote them an email and sent them pictures, and they told me this is like a couple months ago, and they said they were, thanks for the information, and they're going to address it with their production team. Other companies, my goal is to catch fish, and I don't focus just on quantity. I'm okay with catching 0 fish I'm going after the quality of fish. So I'm okay with catching 1 fish the whole year, but if it's that 1 fish that makes the world of difference for me,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, dude. I don't care about
Absolutely.
catching 200 30-inch fish, dude. Wow, that's cool, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun.
But if you were to tell me, hey, Orlando, would you rather catch 330-inch fish, or would you rather catch 160-pound fish? What do you think my answer is going to be?
Just waiting for you to do